In 2019, Monarch's mission to heal Godzilla with a nuclear bomb fails, leaving him to heal by himself, and Ghidorah remains as the Alpha Titan. This leaves the world in a state of chaos, with Titans destroying the planet. Another effect is this nearly destroys the reputation of Monarch, as people see them as unable to do anything. But there is hope. Welcome back to the Filmcast, everyone. Today I will read a story called The Reign of Ghidorah. This is a story that takes place, interestingly, in an alternate universe to the MonsterVerse continuation series that's also on the Filmcast. This isn't a part of that series. That series is over. This is something entirely new. Without further ado, let's get into The Reign of Ghidorah. A few months after the unsuccessful attempt to heal Godzilla, Monarch manages to track down the base Alan Jonah and his men, along with Madison and Emma, are held up in. After a large military assault, they are able to capture Jonah, along with Emma and Madison, and return them to Castle Bravo. The Orga, a device invented by Emma that can communicate with Titans, was also seized and taken to Skull Island for an unspecified purpose. Jonah and Emma are taken into custody for crimes against humanity. These crimes include terrorism and releasing Ghidorah, which has led to the destruction of the planet and the deaths of countless people. Madison, meanwhile, is set free as she was not responsible for any of the acts committed. Madison reunites with her father Mark, and the two travel to the command center of Castle Bravo, and people begin debating on what to do. They then get a call from Admiral Stenz, who informs them that Monarch is on the brink of being shut down, and then being replaced with a new group known as Apex. Stenz lets everyone know that unless Monarch can provide a solution for this world-ending crisis, all of their operations will be shut down and seized by the government. The scene cuts to several Monarch outposts around the world listening to this news told by Stenz. One of them is at the outpost where the Mothra cocoon is, and two of the people listening are Nick and Audrey. Back at Castle Bravo, Mark and Madison ask around for options, and Eileen Chen suggests the currently cocooned Mothra, who is against Ghidorah, will help fight against him. However, they all know she will not be enough. For now, all they can do is wait. Sometime later, a meteor falls to Earth, but the fall is slowed by Monarch maser turrets, and the meteor crashes into the desert. When Monarch personnel arrive at the site, they discover several different materials that they proceed to seize and transport to an unspecified location, after which they begin studying the asteroid the materials were found by. Mark is soon informed by one employee of a top-secret Monarch project that could be the key to defeating Ghidorah. After asking what or where it is, he is told that it is located on Skull Island. However, just before Mark and Madison can be told what kind of weapon it is, alarms begin going off, and the order to evacuate is given. He is coming. As everyone rushes to the Argo, a massive electrical storm approaches Castle Bravo. This storm is followed by clouds that seem to consume everything in its path. Once everyone is aboard, the Argo takes off, and behind them, the storm begins to take a shape. One that includes a gold body, wings, and 3 heads. Ghidorah has arrived. After letting out a horrifying roar, Ghidorah begins firing his gravity beams at Castle Bravo, resulting in several parts of the outpost being destroyed. Despite the outpost being destroyed, this gives the Argo enough time to escape Ghidorah, and it begins flying to another Monarch location. Among the personnel aboard the Argo, 2 of them are Emma Russell and Alan Jonah. The reason they were brought on board was so an eye could be kept on them, but they are still being heavily guarded. Madison asks where they are going, and is told they are heading to Skull Island to regroup with other members of Monarch, and also discuss using the secret weapons stationed there. When the Argo arrives at Skull Island, they find several Monarch ships transporting personnel to the island. Down on the ground, we find Nick and Audrey watching the Argo fly over and land, after which they are escorted inside the outpost. While walking through some hallways, Jonah and Emma are escorted past Nick and Audrey, and the two are shocked to see them, but also furious, particularly at Emma, because her actions resulted in the death of Steve Adams, Nick's father, and Audrey's husband. But it's not just Nick and Audrey. Emma notices all the employees she walks past give her looks of hatred, and right before she's placed in a cell, Chen angrily approaches her and slaps her, calling her a monster. Once everyone regroups, Mark once again asks to see what this secret weapon is, and he, along with many other personnel, are taken deep underground to see the weapon. Before them stands a giant robot that bears resemblance to Godzilla, and everyone is told this mech is known as, Mechagodzilla. It is also revealed that the Orca and many other materials found at the crash site of the meteor have been added to the arsenal of the mech, making him even stronger, and possibly strong enough to defeat Ghidorah. The group are then shown a room where uniforms for the pilot of the mech are kept, and Nick jokingly thinks to himself that one of the uniforms would fit him perfectly. Another shown feature is how the mech is controlled. For context, this Mechagodzilla is controlled similarly to the Jaegers from Pacific Rim, a movie I still have not seen. They're operated in a similar way, except Mechagodzilla has one pilot while the Jaegers have two. While more features are being discussed, an alarm goes off and everyone is called to the surface, and when they get there, they see a fleet of warships surrounding the island. At first, they assume these ships are of the US Navy, but soon notice certain markings on the ships and realize they are not Navy, they are Apex. A small Apex ship arrives on the shore, and an Apex official, named Andrews, announces that the base is now property of Apex. Andrews explains that after the destruction of most of Castle Bravo, it was declared that Monarch was unable to deal with the crisis, and therefore, Apex was called forth to take over all Monarch operations. They have already taken over several Monarch locations, including the base where the asteroid is, and Andrews then orders the Monarch personnel to report as Apex personnel. Madison thinks for a second and tells the others that they should join Apex as Monarch has no support and it would be better for Apex to take over. Despite this, many employees, including Nick and Audrey, refuse to work with Apex, seeing them as untrustworthy. Eventually, Mark, Madison, and several employees walk over to the Apex personnel, officially signifying that they have sided with Apex. Mark joins them because, after the failure to heal Godzilla, his faith in Monarch diminished, and mainly because he doesn't want to leave his daughter alone. This leads Nick to call Madison a, quote, traitor to Monarch. Andrews demands that the remaining personnel join Apex, but Chen and Audrey protest by stating that they will not submit to them and they are Monarch employees. A few soldiers walk up and raise their guns at the crowd, prompting Andrews to say, "We are not asking you to join us. We are ordering you to." The crowd is given a final warning to join Apex or be arrested, and they begin backing up to the entrance of the outpost, and eventually they retreat back into the outpost after a soldier fires a round into the air in an attempt to intimidate them. Andrews orders his men to storm the outpost and arrest the remaining Monarch personnel, as well as take Jonah and Emma with them, an order Madison agrees with, wanting her mother to be freed. Despite the horrible acts committed by Emma, Madison still loves Emma because she is her mother. Nick, Madison, and Chen retreat deep inside the outpost in an attempt to hide. They discuss on what they should do, but then they are discovered. They retreat farther down inside as the Apex soldiers pursue them. Meanwhile, the other Monarch personnel are arrested, and Apex soldiers take Jonah and Emma with them. Back in the outpost, Nick, Audrey, and Chan continue running, but soon find themselves in a trap where they are surprised by a second group of troops, and this results in Audrey and Chen being captured. Nick manages to slip through the soldiers and initially wants to help, but keeps running after Audrey yells for him to while being taken away. Nick enters an elevator and heads for the bottom floor. After getting off, he finds security cameras and looks through them. On one camera, he sees Jonah and Emma being escorted to an Osprey marked with the number 21. But on another camera, he sees Chen and Audrey being led outside and starts debating on what to do, since it will only be a matter of time until the Apex soldiers find him. Nick then remembers he's in the room with Mechagodzilla and begins hatching a plot. Nick enters the room with the pilot uniforms, dons one, and after shutting off the lights to cause problems for the Apex troops who will soon arrive, he makes his way up a separate elevator in the room. Nick enters the mech and begins testing all the buttons to see which one turns it on. But at that moment, the Apex soldiers enter the dark room. They search around for Nick, but it is too dark, so they begin to look around for a light switch. And eventually they find it and turn it on. And standing behind them, looking through the lookout glass, the red eye of an activated Mechagodzilla. The soldiers turn around, and one of them mutters, "Oh shit," and Mechagodzilla strikes at them, resulting in the lookout being destroyed, and all the Apex soldiers dying instantly. After which, Mechagodzilla lets out a roar that is heard by everyone outside. This leads to Andrews questioning what the sound was, and he gets his answer when a rainbow-colored energy beam bursts through the roof of the outpost and Mechagodzilla emerges out and stands over the Apex forces. Everyone is stunned seeing the giant standing before them. Andrews quietly orders his men to slowly move back and for the warships to fire on the mech if necessary. Inside Mechagodzilla, Nick activates speakers installed in the mech to communicate with the personnel on the ground. The voice has a modulator to give the mech an intimidating-sounding voice. The mech is also equipped with zooming vision and lip-reading tech to understand what the humans are saying. Andrews approaches Mechagodzilla and demands Nick to stand down, and Nick promptly declines, demanding that he release the arrested Monarch employees. Madison then steps forward and demands Nick to give in to Apex's demands, and he responds by charging up the mech's rainbow beam, not with the intent of firing, but rather as an intimidation display. Nick does, however, warn them that if they either fire at him or harm any of the prisoners, they will regret it. Tensions begin rising between Mechagodzilla and the Apex force and fleet. It eventually gets to the point where both sides are just waiting for the other to make the first move. A battle is imminent. With a confrontation seemingly around the corner, Andrews orders some of the fully loaded Ospreys to withdraw from the island, one of which is the one Emma, Jonah, and the rest of his men are on. Audrey attempts to approach Nick and communicate with him, but Madison tells her to back off. One reason she does this is because she is confident Nick won't do anything. Another reason is that since this story takes place in an alternate universe to the MonsterVerse continuation series, things are different, and that includes people's personalities. Audrey pays no attention to Madison and keeps moving forward, causing a soldier to hit Audrey in the head with the butt of a rifle, leading Madison claiming that she should have listened. This is the last straw for Nick. In a fit of rage, Mechagodzilla raises its head and fires its energy beam at the Osprey Emma is on, and the aircraft is destroyed instantly, killing all on board. Madison is shocked at this, and Andrews orders the warships to begin firing at the mech while everyone is evacuated from the scene. Despite firing large numbers of shells and missiles, the mech is almost completely unfazed and begins fighting back. Mechagodzilla fires its energy beam at the warships, causing several to blow up and sink. Nick intends to sink the entire Apex fleet, but realizes that the people on the ground are being affected by the battle, and not wanting to cause harm to Audrey, Chen, or the others, decides to withdraw from the island. As the Apex fleet retreats from Skull Island, Mechagodzilla dives deep into the ocean and takes a break after reaching a rather deep part of the sea. Another feature of this Mechagodzilla is that it has the ability to work underwater and provide air for the pilot, allowing him or her to remain submerged for a long time. The scene cuts to the base around the asteroid, now controlled by Apex, and they receive word of the incident that took place at Skull Island, and the troops inform them that they've found out some type of being is inside the asteroid. Communication at the base suddenly cuts out when a storm flies past the outpost, but it is not just any storm. It is a storm caused by Ghidorah, and it causes lightning to strike around the land, and eventually, the asteroid. After the storm passes and Ghidorah moves on, the Apex personnel recuperate from the effects of the storm, but then they feel the ground begin to shake. They realize the shaking is coming from the asteroid, and suddenly, the being inside of it awakens from the lightning and destroys the outpost, killing most of the on-site personnel. However, the survivors manage to warn the other Apex forces of the monster breaking out from the asteroid, and are stunned to see this being through drone cameras sent to investigate. Madison informs Andrews that Monarch named this being Gigan when they still had control over the outpost. She then asks how they will deal with Nick, to which he says they will divert forces to combat Mechagodzilla. Madison asks this because after the death of her mother, she is hell-bent on enacting revenge on Nick. Cut back to Gigan. He leaves the now destroyed base, and after observing his surroundings, lets out a roar into the air. But his roar attracts unwanted attention. Gigan turns around to see this gigantic storm covered in electricity and dark clouds approaching him. But Gigan knows he is about to engage in battle. The storm slows down in front of Gigan, and the being inside of it emerges. Ghidorah's feet land onto the desert soil, his three heads emerge from the dark of the storm, and the devil with three heads unveils its enormous wings. The beast roars at the cyborg, and the two brace for the intense battle they are about to fight. Ghidorah's three heads unleash a hail of fierce and aggressive roars at Gigan, and the cyborg responds by flying at Ghidorah and knocking him to the ground. Gigan starts swinging and stabbing at Ghidorah, but the beast uses its left and right head to strike and bite on Gigan's arms, while the middle head charges up a gravity beam and fires at Gigan. Gigan is thrown back but lands on his knees, but Ghidorah manages to fly up and get back to his feet to continue the fight. Ghidorah takes flight and begins firing its gravity beams at Gigan, and he responds by firing his own visor beam, after which he takes flight and the fight is taken to the air. The two forces continuously collide at each other with heavy attacks, but it seems that the fight is in a stalemate as neither Titan is winning. Eventually, Ghidorah conjures a plan. Gigan flies in for a strike, but he fires a salvo of gravity beams at Gigan, causing the cyborg to fall from the sky before regaining strength and flying back up. Gigan gets back up to see Ghidorah hovering in the distance. Ghidorah roars at him as if he's telling Gigan to attack him, which he does. Gigan flies incredibly fast at Ghidorah, but right before he strikes, Ghidorah suddenly spins around and strikes Gigan in the head with his two tails. One of the blows hits the side of Gigan's visor, which knocks him out, causing him to plummet towards the earth. Gigan crashes into a city and manages to wake up, but when he tries to stand up, he glitches and this causes him to collapse. When he tries to get up again, Ghidorah arrives and crashes in front of him, towering above him. Gigan manages to stand up, but after taking so much damage and seeing that he cannot win, ends up kneeling to the false king. The scene cuts to an Apex drone viewing this, and then we see Anderson, Mark, and Madison watching this with looks of shock on their faces. Back with Gigan, Ghidorah looks at Gigan bowing to him, and after essentially claiming Gigan as a new subject of his kingdom, lets out a massive roar into the air. Back with Nick, he's still on the ocean floor and is trying to contact Monarch bases around the world, but gets no response from any of them. This leaves him feeling sad and alone, thinking that Monarch has been completely taken over and that it's only just him. There's no one left to help him. However, this changes when he does get a response from an outpost still under Monarch control. Nick talks to the voice on the other end, and the voice introduces herself as Ada Mizuno. For context, Ada was a character I thought of after writing Destroy All Monsters. She is a Japanese Monarch employee and is the same age as Nick. She was also intended to be Nick's love interest in the continuation series, though I always thought she would appear after Destroy All Monsters. Ada explains that she herself has been trying to contact Monarch outposts, but has also gotten no response from most of them. However, she does explain that there are outposts hidden around the world that Apex doesn't know about. After a bit, the two begin forming a friendship, and soon Ada asks Nick an interesting question. What exactly is he intending to do with Mechagodzilla? And at first, he doesn't have an answer. Nick explains to her that he took control of the mech as a way to defend himself against the Apex forces chasing him down, but now that he managed to fight them off, he's not really sure what he'll do next. While talking, Nick receives a message from a Monarch communication center, and all he hears is a voice calling for help, and then it suddenly cuts out. Nick tells what just happened to Ada and lets her know he is going to investigate, and he will let her know if he needs her help. Sometime later, Mechagodzilla arrives to find the communication center completely destroyed, with fires and no sign of any employees. Nick is baffled by the sight before him, wondering what happened, and eventually contacts Ada to see if she can help investigate. Ada manages to gain access to the security cameras, and after watching them for a bit, gets a horrified and shocked look on her face. In the footage, she sees Apex troops storm the base, round up all the employees, and then shoot them, after which they burn all the evidence before leaving. Apex did this because they know many of the Monarch outposts they haven't seized will resist when they arrive, and therefore have started exterminating those who oppose them. They targeted the communication center to make sure it couldn't warn the other outposts of what Apex was up to. With this information, Nick and Ada begin to think of what to do, and eventually come up with a plan. Ada reminds Nick that with Mechagodzilla, he can not only stop Apex, but also be the key to defeating Ghidorah and ending the apocalypse. Nick thinks and eventually agrees to this plan, and Ada helps him even further by informing Nick of all the weapons Mechagodzilla is equipped with, and how to use them, making him able to fight better with the mech. The first stage of this plan is to essentially liberate the taken over outposts, which will cause Apex to divert forces to combat the mech, where they will then be defeated. While Ada sends out the warning to all the remaining outposts, Nick begins heading to the closest one to free it from Apex rule. When he arrives, he finds a group of soldiers preparing to execute a large group of Monarch employees, but stop when they hear Mechagodzilla and see the mech approaching them. Not having weapons with significant firepower, the Apex forces flee the scene and the Monarch personnel stand shocked at the mech. Nick approaches them and lets them know that they are safe, and that they should take shelter inside the outpost. Secretly watching them, however, is another Apex drone, and then we see Andrews calling a large squadron of Apex aircraft to attack Mechagodzilla, a plan that Madison is fully supportive of. Cut to a few hours later, Nick has liberated several more locations and he is seen forming a stronger friendship with Ada, but then the radar in the mech alerts him of the massive aerial assault Apex launched. The first to strike are bombers, dropping penetrator bombs on the mech, but they only cause minor damage, and since they are armed with no other weapons, they turn back. Next up are large groups of fighter jets that begin charging towards the mech like a swarm of locusts. Mechagodzilla, meanwhile, simply stares at them. The pilots fly closer and closer, preparing to fire specially made hypersonic penetrator missiles, but suddenly notice little objects rising from the mech. Believing them to be missiles, the jets perform evasive maneuvers, but the objects keep moving towards them, and suddenly fly past the jets. The pilots suddenly realize they are not missiles, they are drones. The drones begin striking at the formation with little missiles, and it turns into a frenzy with jets desperately trying to shoot down the drones while Apex jets are getting shot down all over the place. Eventually, the order is given to fall back, but the remaining few jets still get shot down by the drones, which then return to Mechagodzilla. The planes, however, weren't the only part of this Apex assault, as Nick spots a massive fleet of Apex warships approaching from the distance. The warships begin firing their massive guns and captured maser cannons on Mechagodzilla, and in response, Mechagodzilla begins fighting back. With the use of its rainbow beam and heavy missiles, the fleet begins to slowly decrease in size as ships are destroyed. Despite seemingly doing some damage to the mech, the fleet's efforts are in vain, and Mechagodzilla comes out on top, with all the ships being sunk to the ocean floor. After the battle, Mechagodzilla leaves the area with the intent of continuing to free other Monarch outposts and rescuing its employees. Back at Apex headquarters, Andrews is furious after the massive failure of the Apex assault. After thinking over options, he orders his men to enact something known as the Hammer Down Protocol, which shocks many Apex personnel, but they go ahead with the plan. Back with Nick, he continues traveling across the ocean when he receives a message from Ada, and he can hear that she is afraid. Ada informs Nick that Apex has found their base and have begun storming it. She begs for help, and Nick assures her that he is on his way, and then the radio cuts out. Nick changes course and begins heading to the base Ada is at, which is the same outpost the Mothra Cocoon is at. Nick says to himself he needs to get there fast, but he suddenly hears Madison on a radio simply say to him, "You won't make it there." Nick demands her to answer what she means, but gets distracted when the radar picks up an object heading to him. Madison then says one last thing to Nick. "You'll see." The object is a missile that detonates in front of the mech and causes a massive explosion. The missile was a hydrogen bomb. After the mushroom cloud clears, Apex ships comb the sea looking to see if the bomb worked, and Mechagodzilla is nowhere to be found. They do find pieces of metal, but most of the mech has vanished, and they conclude that Mechagodzilla has been destroyed. Madison cheers at the news, seeing that her mother has been avenged, but soon Andrews approaches her with news. She and Mark will be sent to the outpost the Mothra egg is, with the intent of gaining Mothra's trust when she is born. Their intent is to use Madison to get Mothra to see Apex as allies, so if people try to combat them, Mothra will side with them and fight for Apex. Since Madison had an interaction with Mothra when she hatched, Madison has a connection to Mothra. The two board an aircraft while Andrews boards a separate one, and a group of Apex transport aircraft head off to the outpost. A few hours later, at Outpost 61, the Apex soldiers escort all the Monarch personnel outside into a dark, rainy field in front of the outpost. This is when Madison and Andrews arrive, and the group approach the crowd of captured Monarch personnel. Some of the people in the crowd include Ada, Dr. Ling, Chen's twin sister, and another scientist named Houston Brooks. Andrews makes a statement to the crowd regarding Mechagodzilla, saying, "I know you believe Mechagodzilla is your savior who will come and rescue you, but your savior is not coming. Earlier today, the being was destroyed by a nuclear bomb, and nothing was left. So to reiterate, your savior is not coming." Ada is horrified by this news, as are the rest of the crowd, and the Apex soldiers march forward and raise their guns with the intent of executing them. However, they stop when they hear Apex warships firing at something in the distance over a mountain range. Eventually, the gunfire falls silent, so Andrews contacts the ships to find out what they were firing at, but all he gets is static. But he eventually does hear rumbling coming from the other side of the mountains. Suddenly, a large black figure with red eyes emerges from the other side of the mountain and roars at the crowd. Mechagodzilla has arrived. In case you're wondering, well, considering Mechagodzilla was built to combat all Titans, including Godzilla, who is basically a living nuclear bomb, surviving a hydrogen bomb isn't that unlikely for the mech. Mechagodzilla begins charging at the Apex forces and unleashes a barrage of missiles at them as they flee. The missiles completely decimate the Apex forces, leaving only a few left, including Mark, Madison, and Andrews. The trio attempt to escape in a car, but Mechagodzilla stomps its foot in front of the car, causing it to stop dead in its tracks. At the demand of Mechagodzilla, the three exit the car and are held at gunpoint by Monarch soldiers. But before deciding what to do with them, Mothra's cocoon begins hatching. Seeing this, Mechagodzilla retracts all of its weapons and slowly approaches Mothra as she hatches. Once done, Mothra looks up to see the mech and initially gets concerned, but calms down after recognizing Mechagodzilla as a being that isn't a threat. Mechagodzilla eventually kneels down and reaches out its hand to Mothra as a sign of being allies, and Mothra reaches out to touch Mechagodzilla's finger, confirming the alliance between the Titans. Mothra then flies off to an unspecified location, but Mechagodzilla and the crowd get distracted by a horn sounded in the distance. Mechagodzilla approaches to find a fleet of ships, not from Apex, but the United States Navy. The flagship of this fleet is commanded by Admiral Stenz, who asks to speak with Mechagodzilla and try to reason with Nick since weapons proved useless in stopping him. Admiral Stenz gets straight to the point and asks Nick what his intention is, and Nick begins to speak reasonably with him. Nick states the plan he and Ada came up with to save the world. He then asks Stenz to join him as they could help out a lot. Stenz asks how he knows Nick can be trusted, and to that answer, Nick turns to Ada and asks her to send the footage of Apex soldiers executing Monarch personnel to Stenz. After seeing the footage and some thought, Stenz agrees not only to help, but also request that Apex be shut down and Monarch be reestablished. After a few days, we find Nick and Ada inside the outpost getting to know each other better when they receive news from Stenz that Apex will be replaced by a reestablished Monarch. He also tells them that all of its imprisoned employees are being released, which leads to many, including Chen and Audrey, being transported to the outpost Nick and Ada are at. When everyone arrives, Nick and Audrey have a sweet and heartfelt reunion while the outpost is being set up as Monarch's temporary headquarters. Chen, Ling, and Houston are chosen as the heads of Monarch while the fates of Andrews, Mark, and Madison are decided. Andrews is sent to prison for his crimes while Mark and Madison are welcomed back into Monarch. One thing to keep in mind is Mark sided with Apex mainly because he wanted to be with his daughter. And despite siding with Apex, Madison wasn't actually responsible for any of the actions committed, including the executions or the nuclear strike, but she is not given any positions of influence in the newly formed Monarch. With Apex out of the picture and Monarch back in action, the time has come to enact the next stage in Nick and Ada's plan: defeat Ghidorah's second in command, Gigan. Before this stage of the plan begins, a report comes in of Mothra hovering over the ocean, and it is revealed she is communicating with a still-alive Godzilla. Godzilla has been healing from the oxygen destroyer attack, but the healing process will likely take years, so he will not be able to assist in the battle against Ghidorah. Everyone can hear the emotion in Mothra's voice, especially the sadness, as she has a close connection with Godzilla. Eventually, Mothra flies off to an island known as Infant Island with the intent of laying an egg so she can reincarnate in case she dies, after which she takes off from the island. Now that Mothra is ready for combat, Nick is ordered to join Mothra and assist in the fight against Gigan. Mechagodzilla is activated and begins making its journey to join Mothra. As Mechagodzilla is making its travel, Monarch Command receives news that Mothra has begun battling Gigan, but Gigan has the advantage, so he needs to get there quickly. Mechagodzilla arrives to find Mothra losing, but before he can enter the fight, Gigan suddenly stops and looks at a flaming object falling from the sky. Gigan roars and begins firing his visor beam at the object, but his beam has almost no effect on it. Nick sees this, and after seeing the object, simply asks, "What the hell is that?" The object suddenly changes course and turns away, but then it suddenly turns back at Gigan and is on a direct course with him. The object strikes Gigan and knocks him back, after which it stops and lands on the ground, revealing its true form. The object is revealed to be a Titan-sized robot with several colors and 2 antennas in its head. This robotic warrior begins engaging into a fierce hand-to-hand fight with Gigan and seems to have a clear advantage over the cyborg. Despite the fact this robot seems to have a clear shot of victory, Mechagodzilla and Mothra close in to help this lone warrior finish the job. Together, the 3 Titans battle the cyborg and release unrelenting attacks on Gigan. Eventually, the robot warrior shatters Gigan's visor, making him unable to use his visor beam, and begins pummeling his face. Mothra, meanwhile, manages to knock Gigan to his knees. Mothra and the robot hold Gigan down, while Mechagodzilla approaches him and unveils his serrated blades from the top of his wrists. Gigan roars one last time, and in one fell swoop, Mechagodzilla slices through Gigan's neck, completely decapitating him. As the light in Gigan's eye goes out, his head slides off and falls on the ground, with his body following suit. Mechagodzilla and Mothra use their energy beams to destroy the cyborg's body. Suddenly, the robot begins approaching Mechagodzilla seemingly with malicious intent, and the mech prepares to fight back. The robot grabs the sides of the head of the mech and hacks into the mech's mainframe. Nick begins panicking, but realizes the robot is doing this to communicate with him rather than fight him. The words of the robot appear, and Nick begins reading them out. "Greetings. I am a warrior sent to defeat the being you know as Gigan. I thank you all for your help. I have seen that your planet is being destroyed by Ghidorah, so as gratitude for helping me, I will help you defeat him. One last thing. I am known by many names, but you can call me Jet Jaguar." Nick contacts everyone to tell them about their new and welcomed ally, and his intent to help them. With a new ally, Monarch decides that it's time to enact the final stage of their plan. Kill Ghidorah, dethrone him as Alpha, and end his reign. The first part of this plan is to find out where Ghidorah is, and it is quickly determined his location is outside the city of Boston, so Mechagodzilla begins making his way to the city. While making his way to the city, the citizens of Boston are both evacuated out of the city or to a massive bunker outside of the city. While Nick travels to the given location, he receives a message from Command, and it's from Ada and Audrey. Audrey tells Nick she wanted him to know how much she loves him before entering the battle, while Ada wishes Nick good luck, and thanks him for saving her life from Apex. Back in Boston, a massive electrical storm completely covers the city, and soon, the mastermind behind it unveils himself. Ghidorah makes a landing. The devilish Titan watches as a massive rain and lightning storm blankets the remains of a completely empty Boston, but then hears a sound in the distance. The Orca. Mechagodzilla activated the Orca to gain Ghidorah's attention, but it has another effect. It is played at such a high volume, the orca is heard around the world by the other titans. The frequency causes the other titans to halt their destruction, and Ghidorah to enter a state of rage as he doesn't know where it's coming from. Ghidorah's heads charge up and begin firing their gravity beams in all directions with the hope of silencing the orca, and eventually, it does fall quiet. Ghidorah then begins sensing the presence of another being in the area, so each head looks around, and the left head notices the being in the distance. They turn to see a dark, menacing-looking figure staring at them with red eyes and holding an object in its hand. Mechagodzilla emerges and throws the object at Ghidorah, which is revealed to be Gigan's decapitated head and meant to be a sign of intimidation. In response, Ghidorah stomps on the head and prepares for battle with Mechagodzilla, and at this moment, Jet Jaguar arrives to fight Ghidorah. The two sides square up for battle, and after Ghidorah and Mechagodzilla unleash loud roars at each other, the two sides charge at one another. Mechagodzilla reaches out and grabs Ghidorah's left and right head, stopping the beast dead in its tracks, while Jet Jaguar flies up and delivers a powerful blow to the middle head, knocking Ghidorah to the ground. Ghidorah uses its wings to get back to its feet and begins charging up its gravity beams, but unbeknownst to him, a bright light in the sky appears behind him. Out of the blue, a small cargo ship falls from the sky and crashes into Ghidorah, making him cancel out his attack. And the ship is followed by Mothra emerging from the sky and blasting Ghidorah with her antenna beams. Mechagodzilla also unleashes all of its drones, which don't really hurt Ghidorah, but do keep him distracted and serve well as a nuisance to Ghidorah. The battle seems to be getting worse and worse for Ghidorah as attacks from the three titans keep coming, with no sign of stopping. Eventually, Mechagodzilla gets into a hand-to-hand fight with Ghidorah, and during the struggle, Mechagodzilla manages to slice off Ghidorah's left head. Jet Jaguar then runs forward and forces Ghidorah to the ground. Ghidorah's right head then notices an electrical plant and bites into it, absorbing all the electricity. The three titans notice this, and suddenly, Ghidorah begins unleashing massive amounts of electricity in all directions, knocking back Mechagodzilla and Jet Jaguar, destroying the drones, and knocking Mothra out of the sky. As the titans recover, Mechagodzilla regains its strength and charges at Ghidorah. Mothra gets up and flies towards him, but gets intercepted by another titan, Rodan, who is loyal to Ghidorah. Mechagodzilla, meanwhile, uses its strength to hold Ghidorah down and begins pummeling him, but behind him, the decapitated left head begins growing back. When it finishes growing back, the head attacks Mechagodzilla, and the distraction allows the other two heads to strike at the mech. Ghidorah wraps its heads around the mech and begins flying high into the air, where it drops the mech into the ruined city. Ghidorah lands and spots a wounded Mechagodzilla and begins charging up its gravity beams, but when he fires, Jet Jaguar jumps in front of Mechagodzilla and takes the gravity beams. Jet manages to take most of the punishment, but does take some damage, even having one of his eyes damaged. This, however, buys Mechagodzilla time to get up, and the two machines continue the fight. Meanwhile, Mothra and Rodan continue fighting in the air, and the battle is in a stalemate. The two airborne titans continue flying and inflicting many wounds on each other. Mothra uses her claws and antenna beams, while Rodan attacks her with his claws and even burns her with some magma leaking from his wings. Mothra eventually gets an idea and starts flying away from Rodan, seemingly to get away from him, but what he doesn't know is that she's only leading him into a trap. Mothra roars at Mechagodzilla to get his attention, and Nick realizes Mothra's intentions, and after seeing Jet Jaguar holding off Ghidorah, plans to help her. Mothra flies low and past Mechagodzilla, but when Rodan tries the same thing, Mechagodzilla uses its tail to whack Rodan out of the sky. Rodan crashes into the ground, and after getting up, attacks Mechagodzilla, but is quickly overpowered by the mech. If anything, Rodan is as much a nuisance to Mechagodzilla as the drones were to Ghidorah. Rodan flies up and attempts a strike against the mech, but this ends in a failure, and Mechagodzilla knocks the Firebird into the earth. Mechagodzilla then moves in to finish the fight against Rodan. He stomps on Rodan, grabs his right wing, and breaks it. As Rodan roars in pain, Mechagodzilla picks him up and throws him into Boston Harbor, after which he goes back to resume fighting with Ghidorah. Nick returns to find Ghidorah attempting to stomp on Jet Jaguar while Mothra gets blasted by gravity beams. Mechagodzilla uses its own rainbow beam to knock Ghidorah away from them and regroup with his team. Nick realizes that despite all the punishment inflicted on Ghidorah, he has no significant damage on himself while the three Titans are slowly being worn down. So they need a new plan. Ghidorah takes the chance and goes airborne and starts bombarding the group with continuous barrages of gravity beams. In response, Jet and Mothra fly up to combat Ghidorah while Mechagodzilla stays on the ground and tries to fire on Ghidorah. You see, this version of Mechagodzilla doesn't have jet boosters to fly like the original version does because Monarch had less time to work on it. This Mechagodzilla can't fly, but he does have small boosters that allow him to jump high, but that's the most they can do. In the air, Jet Jaguar does his best to inflict as many blows on Ghidorah as he can, but still has difficulties fighting him. The two forces collide, and Ghidorah uses its heads to tie up Jet Jaguar. Mothra then fires her antenna beams to attempt Ghidorah to let go. In response, all the Ghidorah heads fire at her, and the beams collide, leading to a massive explosion. Mothra attempts to recover, but she gets blasted by more gravity beams, causing her to plummet to the ground. Back on the ground, Mechagodzilla spots Mothra falling and begins rushing to catch her, which, using his boosters, manages to do, but crashes into the ground in the process. Back in the sky, Jet Jaguar desperately tries to break free, but Ghidorah's grip is too strong. The metal head bites into Jet Jaguar's neck with the intent of ripping his head off, and Jet starts taking damage. But before this can happen, a rainbow beam strikes Ghidorah's wings, cutting through them and causing him to let go of Jet Jaguar as he falls to the earth. Jet Jaguar recovers and descends back to the ground after seeing Ghidorah fall through the clouds. Back on the ground, Mechagodzilla and Mothra watch Ghidorah plummet and crash into the ground. Nick sees that the fall heavily wounded Ghidorah and realizes that this could be their chance to deliver the finishing blow to the false king. Mechagodzilla arrives to find Ghidorah trying to get up, and Mechagodzilla charges forward in an attempt to knock him over, but Ghidorah uses its strength to keep himself on his feet. Mothra, however, counters this by flying behind Ghidorah and stabbing through him with her paralyzer stinger, causing Ghidorah to fall back to the ground, unable to move. Mechagodzilla pulls out its blades and begins cutting through Ghidorah's legs, causing Ghidorah's heads to scream in agony. Mechagodzilla eventually manages to completely cut off Ghidorah's legs, and Mothra uses her claws to rip off the middle Ghidorah head. At this moment, Jet Jaguar lands back on the ground and holds up the wounded Ghidorah. Mechagodzilla backs up and begins charging up its strongest weapon, the Absolute Zero Cannon. Seeing this, Ghidorah's remaining heads fire gravity beams at Mechagodzilla, so the mech fires its rainbow beam and the beams collide. Mothra joins in and fires her beams into the energy collision, causing the massive energy from the beam collision to grow in size. As the Absolute Zero finishes charging up, the massive energy from the beams causes a massive explosion, sending all the Titans to fly back from the shockwave. Sometime later, Mechagodzilla gets back up and searches around to find dark clouds everywhere, making visibility limited. Mechagodzilla eventually does find Mothra and Jet Jaguar, but doesn't find Ghidorah anywhere. While Mechagodzilla overlooks the two, a shadow appears behind him. It's Ghidorah. Using his damaged wings as limbs, Ghidorah begins marching at Mechagodzilla and roars at him, and in response, Mechagodzilla turns around and fires the fully charged Absolute Zero. The beam tears through Ghidorah's chest and causes him to stop dead in his tracks as he freezes. The beam is so powerful that the shockwave blows away the storm that blanketed the city during the fight. With the beast dead, The reign of Ghidorah is over. Nick breathes a huge sigh of relief now that the fight is over and turns to face his allies. Jet Jaguar approaches Mechagodzilla and holds out his hand, asking for a handshake as a sign of gratitude, after which Jet Jaguar flies into the sky and begins making the journey back to his home planet. Nick watches him fly off and gives Jet Jaguar a salute of gratitude. Mothra gets up and notices other Titans who were loyal to Ghidorah approaching them. So Mechagodzilla faces them and using its hand smashes the frozen Ghidorah body, causing it to shatter to ashes. The Titans are taken aback by this, and Mechagodzilla exits the scene. Nick gets a message from Monarch Command and hears many congratulating him for, saving the world. Dr. Chen tells Nick that the late Serizawa would have been very proud of him. Nick then has a flashback of Serizawa saying that Godzilla was the key to Earth's natural order, and he gets a sudden realization. When Mechagodzilla was struck by the hydrogen bomb, a lot of radiation was absorbed by the mech and it went to its energy source. Nick asks if it's possible Mechagodzilla could travel to Godzilla's home and give him the energy to fully heal and reclaim his title as Alpha. Everyone realizes that doing this has a likely chance of success, so Mechagodzilla begins traveling to the underwater city. The reason no one had suggested of doing this earlier was simply because they hadn't thought of it with all the chaos going on in the world. Soon, Mechagodzilla arrives and enters the underwater city. Mechagodzilla eventually finds Godzilla, who opens his eyes to see the mech in front of him. Mechagodzilla kneels down and places his hand on Godzilla's head and starts giving him lots of radiation, which starts entering his body. Mechagodzilla eventually stops after giving Godzilla enough, and the king manages to stand up as the mech exits the city. Godzilla dives in and follows the mech, who eventually leads Godzilla to Boston. Godzilla rises from Boston Harbor to find the Titans, including Rodan and Mothra, who he has a sweet reunion with. Mechagodzilla approaches Godzilla and hands him something, the remaining head of Ghidorah, which is still alive. Godzilla grabs the head and using his hands rips the beast's jaw off and slams it onto the ground. Godzilla charges up his atomic breath and fires onto the head, causing it to completely vaporize and destroying all that remains of Ghidorah. Godzilla roars into the air as a sign of victory and reclaiming his throne as king of the monsters. Many at Monarch Command, including Chen, Audrey, and Ada, see this and show signs of happiness now that the future has been saved, and Audrey mentions of how proud she is of Nick. Seeing Godzilla as the new Alpha Titan, Mechagodzilla bows to him and Mothra, which leads to the other Titans bowing too. As the Alpha Titans on Earth, Godzilla and Mothra look over the Titans, and Godzilla lets out another roar into the air. And the story ends. And that was the reign of Ghidorah. It's been a long time coming, and I'm quite proud of it. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for stopping by. Until next time, peace out.